Is it time to sit Cooper Kupp? Are we sitting Raheem Mostert and Zach Moss? We're going right back to him, guys. Welcome to the ADP Average Dudes podcast. I'm your Average Dude host, Matt Mormann, and this is the running back and wide receiver start-sit episode for Week 14. We're going to go into all these running backs, all these wide receivers, and help you set your lineup. If you want to look at the rankings, head on over to the YouTube channel. If you're already here, then hello. And you can see the rankings on the community tab. I'll post them all right there. I also have the quarterback, tight end, and DST rankings on there, as well as an episode going into those right here also on the channel. So let's start out with running backs here. And at the top, it's a lot of the guys you expect. Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, I love him this week. Alvin Kamara's been awesome this season. He's my RB3 for the week going up against Carolina. After that, I think it immediately gets to a bit more dicey because that's kind of how fantasy football works, right? It's like there's like 3 safe options in fantasy football. But then you get Joe Mixon, Zach Moss, Isaiah Pacheco, Kyren Williams. Of course, all names that we thought in the preseason we'd be starting heading into our fantasy football playoffs, right? Mixon, I was very encouraged by Jake Browning this past week. I think that is... If he's competent, then Mixon can be competent, right? Like, if they can just not get game scripted out for Mixon, I think they're going to lean on Mixon. And so, up against the Colts defense has been terrible against the run this season. I think that Mixon can get a ton of work, ton of opportunities, get in the end zone in this one. And look, they're giving up the 4th most points against running backs of the season. It's Joe Mixon. He's in your lineup. He's an RB1. Guys like Zach Moss, Kyren Williams, and Isaiah Pacheco, you're plugging those guys right back in. Kyren and Pacheco have been pretty awesome. Even though it's tough matchups this week for a couple of those guys, I'm going right back to him. Devin Achane, it's time. He's in your lineup also. Let's go down a little bit here because, like, if you're looking at the rankings, a lot of these guys are no question about starters. Excuse me. Even a guy like an Austin Eckler, who you've been majorly disappointed in, I'm viewing him as a bit more of an RB2 at this point, but he's still in your lineup without question. A couple of guys who maybe move up a bit higher than you would expect them to this week. Chuba Hubbard is my RB16 this week, going up against the New Orleans Saints. He's been really on a heater these last couple of weeks, getting a ton of work in this Carolina offense. And as long as he's getting volume, I think he can be exactly like the guy right behind him in my rankings in Najee Harris. I think that's a really good comparison here, where it's not the most efficient, it's not the prettiest in the world, it's not a good offense either, but he is getting the opportunities, he's getting the work. And at some point when you're floating around RB16 or so, that's kind of all you need sometimes. And actually, a couple guys behind him that might be a little bit surprising is Derrick Henry, DeAndre Swift, and Raheem Mostert. All guys kind of not... I'm not feeling great about at the moment. Swift, it's mainly because of the matchup. That Dallas defense might get him kind of uninvolved in the offense. It's weird to think DeAndre Swift getting game scripted a little bit, but, you know, he hasn't really been catching the ball as much this season because Philly doesn't throw the ball to the running backs as much. And so that's causing DeAndre Swift to have a little bit of that potential. Same thing, Derrick Henry, coming off with concussion protocol this past week. And going up against Miami, look, if the Dolphins just torture him in the first quarter, Derrick Henry, this happens like twice a year, right? Where the Titans just get blown out and Derrick Henry does absolutely nothing. That's my worry for Derrick Henry this week. So I would definitely prefer a few of those guys in front of him, a Travis Etienne, a Josh Jacobs. However, he is still Derrick Henry. He is still probably in my lineup at RB18. Going a little further down here, Raheem Mostert. By the way, I just want to mention him on the other side of that. I'm getting very nervous about Raheem Mostert. I think he's getting less and less involved. They're getting Achane more and more involved. But I think you can still squeeze that orange for a little bit more juices than RB2 for the next couple of weeks, but I do not want to be counting on Raheem Mostert in my lineup in the fantasy football playoffs. Ezekiel Elliott is a streaming option this week as Ramondre Stevenson is out with injury. It's one of those things where anytime the handcuff kind of gets a job because a guy left their backfield because of injury, they get more work because of it. And I'm not excited about Zeke, but he is an RB2 option for me. A.J. Dillon still is in my lineup. As of this moment, I'm assuming Aaron Jones is not playing. So that gets A.J. Dillon into the top 24 against the New York Football Giants. Just outside my top 24, guys I would like to avoid if possible. Breece Hall, Zach Charbonnet, Jerome Ford, Javonte Williams. These 4 names, that hurts my heart so much. I love these 4 players. Breece Hall, Zach Charbonnet, Jerome Ford, Javonte Williams. I've got all these guys in several leagues, and I'm not feeling too good about any of them at the moment. Breece Hall is running for feels like 2 yards a carry for the last several weeks. He has survived with some pass catching. As of this moment, I don't even know who the Jets quarterback is going to be this week. I know they waived Tim Boyle. Zach Wilson does not want to start for them, apparently. I don't know. Maybe he will be doing it anyway. Regardless, it's an offense I would like to avoid if possible. In the other episode against the DSTs, I mentioned the Houston Texans because this Jets offense is an absolute train wreck and a mess. And I would like to not be playing Breece Hall. There are definitely some wide receivers I'd rather have in my flex options than this group of running backs. It's tough pill to swallow with some of these guys because they are really, really good. And they're guys you've relied on for windows of the season. But it is what it is at this point. Zach Charbonnet, he continues to have this stretch of just brutal matchups, right? He finally gets his opportunity with a Ken Walker injury, and every matchup is tough. This week he has San Francisco. They are 30th in points allowed to running backs, as in they are allowing the 3rd fewest points against running backs. So you do not want Zach Charbonnet in your lineup. Jerome Ford is kind of getting into a 3-headed monster here of a backfield. Kareem Hunt is playing more and more. He actually out-touched Jerome Ford last week. I still prefer Ford over Hunt. I'm hoping that is kind of a 1-week fluky kind of thing, and Ford can get back on the horse this week. We'll see. I would like for him to be out of my lineup if possible. It may not be possible because you've been riding Jerome Ford for most of the season if you've had him. And so while I would like to get away from him, you may not have an option to, but there are guys I prefer that you could have. You could have a Zeke Elliott or an A.J. Dillon or a James Cook along with your Jerome Ford, who I prefer. Javonte Williams, it's a nice matchup against the Chargers. It's just hard to trust at the moment. I don't hate him as an RB2 option. I do have him at RB28. I would like to not start him, but if you have to, I think you can get away with it. Keaton Mitchell, the Gabe Davis among running backs, it feels like, this is that group, right? Keaton Mitchell, Jaylen Warren, Devin Singletary, Tyjae Spears, Alexander Madison. These are all guys who I think you're kind of hoping do something with limited touches, right? It's kind of how I feel. We're going to talk about group wide receivers, right? The Gabe Davis group. And that's kind of how I'm viewing these running backs a little bit. It's like they're boom-bust flex options. Jaylen Warren is picking up a bit more steam, but Najee Harris is still playing over him way too much for me to take him seriously as an RB2 option. But I don't mind him as a flex necessarily. Same thing with Keaton Mitchell, where he's not getting a ton of touches. The Ravens are getting him more and more involved. And I think in the coming weeks, you're going to be really happy you have Keaton Mitchell. I just don't necessarily think this is the week for that. Houston's backfield is becoming more of a split and more of a headache. So Devin Singletary outside my top 30 this week, as is Dameon Pierce. Also, speaking of the Ravens with Keaton Mitchell, Gus Edwards, I got him down at 35. He might score a touchdown and be good, but again, it's kind of a boom-bust situation there, where if he's not getting in the end zone, I don't think you're getting very much out of Gus Edwards. Let's flip the page over here. Let's go over to the wide receivers. A bit more fun, a bit more happy when we're talking about wide receivers. Mike Evans is like my favorite start of the week among wide receivers. I got him at wide receiver 7 this week. Definitely a guy I will have in some DFS lineups going up against the Atlanta Falcons. He's crossed 1,000 yards for the season. We love Big Mike, or I love Big Mike at least. And he's been great. DJ Moore, I'm also putting him right back into my lineups coming off the bye against Detroit this week. Brandon Ayuk is top 10 for me against Seattle. Justin Jefferson, just in case you were worried, him coming off the injury, I do have him at wide receiver 9. So, there could be a world where you've got 2 wide receivers above him on your team. I think it's highly unlikely. He is going against Vegas. They're atrocious against wide receivers. I'm happily putting Justin Jefferson right back in my lineup at his first week being active. Jamar Chase just outside my top 12 this week, going against the Colts, but he is a wide receiver 13, so I think you're probably getting Chase in your lineup as well. I was very encouraged by him this past Monday night. I was encouraged by the entire Bengals offense. I really was, except for T. Higgins, and we will get to him in just a little bit. I think Jamar Chase is definitely a guy who he's going to get peppered with targets. It's a little bit like the guy right behind him in my rankings with Devontae Adams. The targets aren't pretty, but it's a lot of targets. And that volume can definitely set you free and give you a good week. Puka is right back in my lineup this week as long as he's playing. I know Sean McVay said he went through a walkthrough, but McVay doesn't know what that means because he did everything. So I'm assuming Puka Nacua is in, and if he is likely in my lineup. I've got him at wide receiver 16 this week. Then I've got Nico Collins at 17. I'm a little nervous about Nico, though. I think I would like him more in a generic matchup than like a wide receiver 17, but it is a tough matchup because the Jets defense, you're going to get sauced. So I don't love that for Nico. I'm excited for what Nico can be for the fantasy playoffs. I'm not excited about Nico this week. Right behind him, I've got Deebo Samuel, Devonta Smith, and DK Metcalf, all three guys that, you know what, in the more I look at it, maybe I would have all those guys above Nico. I think I'd make that switch. Those are not the toughest matchups. Seattle, for Deebo, that's a pretty good matchup. I'd probably actually move him up a little bit. Devonta Smith, I think, is right there with Nico as kind of that fringe wide receiver too. And then DK getting San Fran. San Fran is actually not that great against wide receivers this season. Wide receivers have actually been able to score on them a little bit more than people may realize. So DK Metcalf, I have no issue with being in my lineup this week. Rashee Rice, I'm a little excited for. He's wide receiver 2 this week at 21. Getting that Buffalo matchup, he's getting more and more involved in the offense. I don't know why he can't play on multiple downs, it feels like. Feels like every time I see him, he's either coming on the field or coming off the field, right? But this is that time of year where if rookies are putting things together, they can be electric and help you win a league. Right after that, I've got Garrett Wilson. They're taking on the Texans this week. It's just a mess. This is where Garrett Wilson lives, is like low-end wide receiver 2 or a flex, right? This is just where he's been this year, and it's unfortunate. Cooper Kupp is still wide receiver 2 for me, even though I'm very concerned. I would like him out of my lineup, but you're probably having to use him at worst as a flex. Let's go a little bit further down here and talk about some of those flex options here. You've got guys like Brandon Cooks, Drake London, Zay Flowers, and then you have what I'm calling the Gabriel Davis group of Christian Watson, Tyler Lockett, Gabe Davis, T. Higgins. These are guys who I don't mind being flex options because they do have a higher upside, right? Like, I would rather all of those guys be in my lineup as a flex compared to a Alexander Madison, Khalil Herbert, Gus Edwards, right? Like that range of running backs. If you're kind of comparing the running backs to the wide receivers, I would rather play my Breece Halls, my Zach Charbonnets, my Jerome Fords, and my Javonte Williams. I think Keaton Mitchell and Jalen Warren are interesting to put head to head with this group. Pretty much, if you're looking at the rankings from like Brandon Cooks through T. Higgins, I think that's a very tough decision with all of those guys versus a Keaton Mitchell or a Jalen Warren. I think in general, if catches count for points, I would go wide receiver there. If it is non-PPR, I think I would probably go running back there. That's how I would approach that group. And then after that, it's mostly guys I'm trying to avoid if possible, even though a few of them I'd actually like. Christian Watson is banged up, so if he's out, I would move Jaden Reed up. But right now I have Jaden Reed at wide receiver 34, followed by Noah Brown, JSN, and then Calvin Ridley. I forgot to mention this one. Calvin Ridley is a guy I'm absolutely not putting in my lineup this week. I'm not a Calvin Ridley guy. I haven't been for a while. And they have a very tough matchup against the Cleveland Browns with a backup quarterback on top to boot. So I am absolutely getting Calvin Ridley out of my lineup by all means possible. You absolutely have 3 wide receivers to put in your lineup over him. He is my wide receiver 37 this week. A lot of people have their starts of the week. Calvin Ridley would be my sit of the week. I would definitely not want him in my lineup. Same thing kind of goes for George Pickens. Odell, I want to give it one more week. I'm okay having him on my roster. I want to see what this Ravens offense looks like this week. No Mark Andrews coming off a bye. I want to see if they get Odell more involved in that Mark Andrews kind of middle of the field role. I'm personally hopeful that Zay Flowers. That's why I've got Zay Flowers at wide receiver 29, right in front of Christian Watson, in front of Tyler Lockett. I want to see Zay Flowers get a lot of work this week. I want to see Zay Flowers get a lot of targets. I want to see Zay Flowers kind of be that chain mover for the Ravens with no Mark Andrews. I think I've pretty much touched on all the names of note. I just want to be sad for a minute here. So Chris Godwin is my wide receiver 44, and Adam Thielen. It's over, buddy. It was fun while it lasted, but you gone. He's my wide receiver 45 this week. So that will do it, I believe, for this week's episode of the running backs and wide receivers starts and sits. Best of luck in your matchups. If you have not yet, go check out the quarterback tight end DST podcast also. That episode is going to help you make those start-sit decisions for those. Also, if you have any flex questions, if you have any other questions, if you guys are like, hey, these rankings are garbage, leave a comment down below on the YouTube video, send us a tweet on X at ADP Dudes, and let us know what you guys are thinking. What are your start-to-sit decisions you're making this week? And look, there are some finesse to this, right? Sometimes you don't want to play those boom-bust wide receivers. Sometimes you just want safe points. Those kind of things are going to fluctuate in the rankings a little bit. I don't know your exact scenario. Each lineup is different. Each matchup is different. So let us know your questions, and we will get back to you with some start-sit help. And I will see you guys next week. Best of luck in your Week 14 matchups.